The Whitlock estate was the kind of place people whispered about. Grand halls echoing with elegance, chandeliers that never dimmed, and walls lined with portraits of a family that looked perfect from the outside. But perfection often hides what hurts the most. At the center of it all was Caroline Whitlock, the powerful CEO of Whitlock Designs. She was the kind of woman who commanded every room she entered, polished, poised, and intimidatingly precise. The city admired her as a visionary leader, a single mother who had built an empire from ashes after tragedy. Yet, behind the luxury and flawless press releases, there was silence, the kind that lingers when love has been replaced by distance. Her daughter, Amelia, knew that silence well. At just 8 years old, Amelia was a quiet, thoughtful child who saw everything and spoke very little. Her long brown hair often fell across her face, hiding the soft sadness in her eyes. Born with a hearing impairment, she communicated mostly through sign language, a world her mother rarely stepped into. Caroline loved her daughter, at least in the way she knew how, by giving her the best tutors, the finest clothes, and a future that was supposed to make up for everything Caroline had lost. But love, Amelia had learned, didn't always look like hugs and bedtime stories. Sometimes it looked like an empty chair at dinner. That evening, the Whitlock mansion buzzed with life. The company's annual charity gala was in full swing, guests swirling through the ballroom like fragments of a dream. Waiters in crisp uniforms passed trays of champagne, and a live orchestra filled the space with music that Amelia couldn't hear, only feel through faint vibrations beneath her feet. She stood near the edge of the hall, dressed in a pale blue dress that shimmered under the lights. Her small hands moved anxiously, fidgeting with the hem of her skirt. Around her, people laughed and clinked glasses, but no one noticed the little girl who stood in silence. No one except a man in a janitor's uniform pushing a cleaning cart near the doorway. Gabriel Hart, 38, had been with Whitlock Designs for just a few months. He was quiet and efficient, the kind of employee who went unnoticed, which suited him just fine. After losing his wife 2 years earlier, Gabriel had learned to live in the background, raising his daughter Penny on his own and taking whatever jobs would keep their small world afloat. He was wiping down a silver railing when he saw her, the little girl standing all alone amid the laughter of grown-ups. Her eyes weren't just sad, they were familiar. He recognized that kind of loneliness. He'd seen it in Penny when her mother's chair stayed empty at the breakfast table. Something tugged at him, a quiet instinct he couldn't explain. When a waiter accidentally brushed past Amelia, nearly spilling his tray, the girl flinched. The man apologized, but she didn't respond. She hadn't heard him. He shrugged and walked away. Gabriel set his rag aside and slowly approached. Kneeling to her level, he smiled and lifted his hands. "Hello." Amelia's eyes widened. Someone was signing. Tentatively, she raised her hands. "Hello," she signed back, a small smile breaking through. Gabriel's rusty fingers stumbled through the motions, but he managed. "My name is Gabriel. You okay?" She nodded, her shyness fading into curiosity. "You know how to sign?" He smiled. "A little. My daughter taught me." Something in Amelia's face softened. She signed back slowly. "No one else here does." Gabriel's chest tightened. He glanced toward the crowd where Caroline laughed among investors, her eyes never drifting toward the corner where her daughter stood. He turned back to Amelia and sighed. "Well, I do. And I think this party needs a better dance partner, don't you?" Her giggle was silent but bright, and it made something in Gabriel's chest loosen for the first time in years. Across the hall, Caroline finally noticed the janitor kneeling beside her daughter. Her perfect smile froze. She didn't yet know that this quiet man, with kind eyes and calloused hands, was about to unravel the walls she'd spent years building. Because sometimes it takes a stranger to remind you that love isn't about being perfect. It's about finally being seen. For a brief, perfect moment, Amelia forgot she was invisible. She and Gabriel sat on the floor near the edge of the ballroom, laughing quietly, only sign language allowed. He taught her a few silly signs, how to say chocolate, dog, and messy room, each one met with her soft giggles. For a man who had spent years trapped in the silence of his own making, the child's laughter felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. But perfection rarely lasts. "Excuse me." The voice sliced through the air, cool, sharp, and unmistakable. Caroline Whitlock stood just a few feet away, heels clicking against the marble floor. Her polished smile didn't reach her eyes. Gabriel rose quickly, wiping his palms on his uniform. Ma'am, he said politely, his tone low. Caroline's gaze flicked between them, her daughter, and the janitor in conversation in sign language. What exactly do you think you're doing? Gabriel hesitated. I was just keeping her company, ma'am. She looked. You were talking to her, she interrupted, her brow tightening. She doesn't talk to strangers. Amelia tugged her mother's sleeve, her small hands moving rapidly. He's nice, Mama. He knows how to talk like me. Caroline frowned. Enough, Amelia! Gabriel stepped back, sensing the rising tension. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean any harm. She crossed her arms. You're here to clean, mister. Hart, he said quietly. Gabriel Hart. Well, Mr. Hart, please remember your role. This is a professional event, not a daycare. The words landed heavier than she intended. Amelia's eyes dimmed, and Gabriel nodded stiffly, retreating toward his cart. But as he turned, Caroline noticed something she hadn't before. The way Amelia's expression fell, her fingers twitching in unfinished signs, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. For a moment, guilt pricked at her heart. Then someone called her name from across the hall, a board member waiting for a photo, and she straightened, pushing the feeling aside. Business first, emotions later. The next morning, Caroline tried to focus on her work, but her mind replayed the scene from the night before. Amelia's smile, the janitor's patient hands, the way he'd looked at her daughter, not with pity, but with understanding. Still, the idea unsettled her. Why was the janitor signing to her child? How did he even know how? By afternoon, she called HR to inquire about him. Gabriel Hart, said her assistant. Single father, works part-time nights. Clean record. He's been here about 4 months. Any prior experience? The assistant checked the file. Used to teach at a community center. Something to do with communication programs. Caroline paused. Sign language programs? Yes, ma'am. Seems that way. That detail caught her off guard. She hung up, but couldn't shake the image of his calm face, the gentle way he'd spoken to Amelia. Later that week, she arrived home early, something she rarely did. Amelia was in her room drawing, her fingers smudged with crayon. When Caroline peeked inside, her daughter quickly hid the paper. What are you drawing, sweetheart? Amelia hesitated, then handed it over. It was a simple picture. Her mother, and Gabriel, all smiling, hands lifted mid-sign. Above them, in uneven letters, she'd written, "My friends." Caroline's throat tightened. You drew him? Amelia nodded. He listens, Mama. He talks like me. The words hit like a quiet truth. Caroline had spent years building an empire, yet couldn't remember the last time she'd truly spoken to her own daughter. That night, long after Amelia fell asleep, Caroline sat in her study staring at the drawing. The neat lines blurred as tears she didn't expect welled in her eyes. For once, she didn't push them away. The next morning, she made a decision. When she arrived at the office, she asked the front desk to page Gabriel Hart. He appeared 10 minutes later, nervous but composed. You wanted to see me, Miss Whitlock? Caroline took a breath. I owe you an apology. He blinked, surprised. For what? For yesterday, she said softly, and for not realizing how much my daughter needed someone who actually saw her. Gabriel smiled faintly. She's a wonderful kid. You just have to learn her language. Caroline nodded. Then teach me. Gabriel didn't know it yet, but that single request, teach me, would change everything. Because sometimes the smallest act of understanding becomes the bridge between two broken worlds. Caroline Whitlock wasn't used to asking for help. Her life ran on precision, meetings timed to the minute, presentations rehearsed, interviews scripted. But nothing in her career had ever made her feel as nervous as the moment she stood outside the maintenance office, clutching a notepad. Gabriel looked up from where he was fixing a broken mop handle, surprised. Miss Whitlock? She took a breath. You said I should learn about Amelia's world. I would like to start. For a moment, he just stared at her, not out of disbelief, but something softer, like respect. All right, he said finally. Let's start small. He cleared a table in the corner and motioned for her to sit. Caroline felt awkward, out of place in her tailored suit, surrounded by cleaning supplies and fluorescent lights. But as Gabriel began demonstrating the basic hand movements, hello, thank you, I love you, her posture relaxed. At first, her hands moved stiffly, uncertain. Don't think about it too much, he said gently. Language isn't just hands, it's rhythm, emotion. You already know how to speak with your eyes, Miss Whitlock. You just have to trust them. She let out a quiet laugh. You make it sound easy. It isn't, he said, smiling, but it's worth it. They practiced for an hour. Gabriel corrected her gently, his tone patient. He didn't talk to her like she was the CE. He talked to her like someone who wanted to learn. For Caroline, that was new. By the time she left that evening, she could sign a handful of words. Her movements weren't graceful yet, but they were honest. The next evening, she sat at the dinner table with Amelia, who was doodling between bites of spaghetti. Caroline waited until her daughter looked up, then raised her hand awkwardly and signed, "Hello?" Amelia froze mid-bite, eyes widening. Caroline smiled nervously. "Did I do it right?" Amelia nodded slowly, a grin spreading across her face. "You signed, 'Hello, Mama.'" Caroline laughed, a genuine sound she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. "Yes," she signed, repeating it carefully. The conversation was short, clumsy, but when Amelia reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand, Caroline felt a warmth she couldn't describe. That night, she called Gabriel. "I think I made her proud," she said. "You did," he replied softly. "She'll remember that forever." As weeks turned into months, lessons became part of their rhythm. Caroline started inviting Gabriel to teach at her home on weekends so Amelia could join. The three of them would sit around the kitchen table, flashcards spread out, laughter filling the space. Sometimes Penny, Gabriel's daughter, tagged along. She and Amelia bonded instantly, signing and giggling in their shared secret language. Sophia, the family's housekeeper, would peek in occasionally and whisper, "They look like a family." Caroline pretended not to hear, but deep down, she felt it too. The more time they spent together, the more Caroline noticed the little things. How Gabriel's hands moved with quiet confidence, how his eyes softened whenever Amelia smiled, and how his voice carried warmth instead of pity. He wasn't just teaching her sign language, he was teaching her how to listen. One Saturday, after the girls went to play in the yard, Caroline stayed behind while Gabriel gathered the lesson materials. "You're good with them," she said. He shrugged modestly. Kids understand more than adults give them credit for. They don't see titles or money, they just see kindness. Her eyes lingered on him. "You speak like someone who's lost something." He hesitated, then nodded. "My wife, 3 years ago, heart failure. Penny was 5. Caroline's heart clenched. "I'm sorry." He smiled faintly. "You don't have to be. We still talk about her. She's just on a different side of the conversation now." Caroline looked down at her hands, suddenly small against the polished table. "I lost my husband too. The crash took everything I thought I was." Their eyes met. Two people who had forgotten what it meant to be understood. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't empty this time. It was full of empathy, of healing, of possibility. From the yard, the sound of laughter drifted in. Amelia was showing Penny how to sign butterfly, her little hands fluttering in the sunlight. Gabriel smiled. "She's happier now." "She's seen more of me in the last 2 months than in the past 2 years, Caroline admitted. "And it's because of you." He shook his head. "No, it's because you chose to listen." Caroline didn't realize it yet, but learning her daughter's language wasn't the only transformation happening. Because sometimes, when you finally open your heart to understanding, love finds its way in quietly without asking permission. By winter, the Whitlock house had changed. The halls that once echoed with silence now carried laughter, soft, uneven, genuine. Amelia had grown more confident, Penny more talkative, and Caroline, well, she had begun to rediscover herself through the eyes of the people she once thought she had nothing in common with. On Saturday mornings, the kitchen smelled of pancakes instead of espresso. Amelia and Penny often sat at the counter flipping through Gabriel's flashcards while he worked the stove, pretending not to burn anything. Caroline would tease him, claiming she could cook better, though everyone knew she hadn't boiled an egg in years. Somehow, these small, ordinary moments felt extraordinary. That morning, the girls were building a fort in the living room when Caroline found herself standing beside Gabriel pouring coffee. "You've turned my house into a daycare," she joked, smiling. He grinned. "The best kind, I hope." For a moment, their eyes met, hers full of warmth, his of something unspoken. She looked away first, stirring her coffee just to have something to do with her hands. "Amelia's changing," she said quietly. She laughs more now. She signs faster than I can keep up. That's because she finally feels understood, he said, and because she's teaching you just as much as you're teaching her. Caroline nodded slowly. I spent so long giving her everything I could buy, but none of it was what she needed. Gabriel leaned against the counter. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't money or success. It's attention, being present. His words lingered in the air like a melody she didn't want to end. Later that afternoon, the first snow of the season began to fall. The girls begged to play outside, and before Caroline could protest, they were already in the yard, bundled in scarves and mittens. Come on, Mama, Amelia signed, jumping up and down. Help us build a snowman! Caroline hesitated, watching from the window, until Gabriel tossed her a coat with a grin. She's asking, not the CEO, just Mom. She laughed, slipping into the coat, and followed him outside. The four of them built the world's most crooked snowman. Amelia insisted on giving Gabriel's old cap. Penny drew a lopsided smile in the snow for its face. Caroline laughed so hard she had to sit down, the sound echoing into the cold air. At one point, she caught Gabriel watching her. His eyes were soft, the kind that didn't just see her, they understood her. When the girls ran off to make snow angels, Caroline and Gabriel stood side by side, breath visible in the winter air. You're good with her, she said quietly. She reminds me of Penny, he replied, braver than most adults I know. She's brave because of you, Caroline said. You showed her that silence doesn't mean weakness. He smiled. And you showed her that love doesn't have to be perfect. The wind shifted, carrying the faint laughter of their daughters. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them wasn't empty anymore. It was safe. When Gabriel finally turned to leave that evening, Amelia tugged at his sleeve and handed him a small drawing. Two families standing together under falling snow. She'd written one word at the bottom, crooked but clear, home. Gabriel's eyes glistened. He signed back, thank you, and hugged her gently. From the doorway, Caroline watched, something in her chest tightening in the best way possible. After the girls went to bed, she sat by the fireplace, sipping tea. The flicker of flames cast soft shadows against the walls, and in those shadows, she saw how much her life had shifted since the day that quiet janitor first signed hello. It frightened her how natural it all felt now, how his presence had become part of the rhythm of their days. But it also comforted her. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of feeling. She looked down at her hands, hands that used to only type and command and control, and smiled softly. They had learned to speak a new language. And maybe, just maybe, they were learning how to love again too. But when Gabriel's past unexpectedly returns, and a painful decision threatens to undo everything they've built, Caroline will have to prove that love isn't just about learning to speak, it's about choosing to stay when life goes silent again. The warmth that had filled the Whitlock home for months began to shift with the arrival of one envelope. Gabriel found it waiting on his kitchen counter when he returned home one evening. His name printed in neat black letters across a government seal. He stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a job offer, a full-time teaching position at a state program for children with hearing impairments, something he'd once dreamed of doing before life forced him into janitorial work. It was everything he'd ever wanted, and it was 300 miles away. That night, he sat at the table, the offer letter beside his coffee mug. Penny was coloring, humming softly. Daddy, she asked, what's wrong? He smiled faintly. Nothing, sweetheart, just grown-up stuff. But she studied him for a moment, then whispered, you're thinking about leaving. He froze. Who told you that? Nobody, she said. I can tell. You get quiet when you're sad. Gabriel sighed. It's a good job, honey. One that helps people like Amelia, but it's far away, she finished softly. He nodded. Yeah. She put her crayons down and said simply, I like it here, Daddy. I like them. He swallowed hard. Me too. When he told Caroline a few days later, her face fell before she could hide it. That's amazing, she said, forcing a smile. You've earned it. He nodded slowly. It's a chance I never thought I'd get again. But you should take it, she interrupted, her tone clipped. Don't let us hold you back. He frowned. You wouldn't be holding me back. You'd be the reason I'd want to stay. The room went still. For a moment, Caroline didn't breathe. It wasn't what he said that shook him. It was how easily he said it, how true it sounded. She turned away, pretending to straighten a stack of papers on her desk. You don't owe me or Amelia anything, Gabriel. You've already done more than I could ever thank you for. He hesitated, wanting to bridge the distance, but something in her posture, that old, polished armor she wore when she was scared, stopped him. Caroline, he said softly, this isn't about owing anyone anything. She shook her head, her back still to him. Go. Take the job. It's what you're meant to do. He wanted to argue, to make her see that what he was meant to do might have already found him, here, in her home, with their girls laughing down the hall. But she wouldn't turn around, so he left quietly. Days turned into weeks. The lessons stopped. The kitchen was quiet again. Even Amelia seemed to notice the difference. She'd sign to her mother every evening, "Where's Gabriel?" Caroline always answered with the same lie, "He's busy, sweetheart." But late at night, when Amelia was asleep, she'd sit by the fire and stare at her hands, the same hands that had learned how to speak in silence, but hadn't learned how to ask him to stay. One evening, while cleaning Amelia's room, she found a folded note tucked beneath her daughter's pillow. It was a drawing, Gabriel, Penny, Amelia, and herself all holding hands under a tree. Above them, in big, uneven letters, Amelia had written, "We're family now." Something inside Caroline broke open. The next morning, she drove to the school where Gabriel worked nights. She found him sweeping the hallway, just like the day they'd met. He looked up, startled. "Caroline?" She walked toward him, her heart pounding. "You're really going to take it?" He nodded slowly. "I thought I should. For Penny, for myself." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You told me once that being present was the greatest gift, that listening matters more than words. Well, I've been listening, Gabriel, and I can't pretend anymore that your place isn't here with us." He stared at her, his breath catching. Caroline's eyes glistened. "If you go, I'll understand. But if you stay, you won't just be teaching anymore. You'll be home." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he reached for her hand. "I've been waiting for you to say that," he whispered. But even as love finally began to take shape, life had one last lesson to teach them, because sometimes finding home isn't about where you live, it's about who you're willing to fight for. The day Gabriel made his choice, the world felt strangely quiet. The winter air was crisp, the city streets glistening with thin sheets of frost. He stood in the park with Penny, their breath forming clouds in the cold air, the same park where everything had first begun. Penny watched him carefully, her gloved hands tucked into his coat pocket. "Are we moving, Daddy?" Gabriel knelt to her level. "No, sweetheart," he said softly. "We're not." Her eyes widened. "We're staying?" He nodded, smiling. "We're staying." Penny threw her arms around his neck, giggling. "Good! Amelia said she'd be sad if we left." Gabriel laughed quietly, pulling her close. He hadn't realized how much of his heart already belonged here, in this city, in that house, in their laughter. He'd spent years surviving after losing his wife, living half alive because it was safer than feeling. But Caroline and Amelia had changed that. They'd reminded him that love doesn't die, it just waits for you to be ready again. That evening, Caroline opened the door to find him standing there, snow in his hair, Penny by his side, a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "You came back," she whispered, voice trembling. He smiled softly. "I never really left." Amelia rushed forward, her face lighting up. "You stayed," she signed excitedly. Gabriel knelt and signed back, "Of course I stayed. You still owe me a snowman rematch." She laughed silently, throwing her arms around him, and for the first time in months, the house felt full again. Caroline stood in the doorway watching them, tears stinging her eyes. When he rose to face her, she didn't speak. She just stepped forward and hugged him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand. It was simple. Two people who had been broken in different ways, finally fitting together in the same quiet rhythm. Over the next few months, life found a new pace. Gabriel accepted a part-time teaching role with a local nonprofit that partnered with Whitlock Designs to create inclusive communication programs. Caroline insisted on funding the initiative, calling it the Whitlock-Hart Foundation for Connection. When he protested that his name didn't belong beside hers, she only smiled. "It does. You taught me what connection really means." Their children flourished. Penny and Amelia became inseparable, their secret sign language conversations filling every room with joy. Caroline and Gabriel often sat nearby, watching in quiet awe at how easily the two girls built bridges between worlds that once felt so far apart. Sometimes Caroline would catch Gabriel looking at her the way he used to look at the stars, like she was something worth believing in, and when their hands brushed, she didn't pull away anymore. They didn't rush love. They let it grow, steady and patient, like spring after a long winter. On the first anniversary of the foundation, they held a small event at Amelia's school. The children performed a short play in sign language, a story about friendship and courage. Caroline sat in the front row, her eyes glistening with pride as Amelia stood on stage, signing her lines confidently. When the applause faded, Amelia ran straight into her mother's arms. "Did I do okay?" she signed. Caroline smiled through tears. "You were perfect." Gabriel joined them, his hand finding hers. She looked at him, and in that moment, everything that had once felt impossible finally made sense. Life had broken them both once, but it was in that brokenness that they had found the room to rebuild something new. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet and the children were asleep, Gabriel and Caroline sat on the porch watching snow begin to fall again. "It's funny," she said softly, "how something as simple as learning a few signs changed everything." He nodded. "Sometimes it's not the language that changes things, it's the people willing to learn it." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad you stayed." He looked at her, eyes warm. "Me too. You and Amelia, you taught me how to listen again." Snowflakes drifted through the cold air, catching the soft porch light like falling stars. Caroline closed her eyes and whispered, "I think this is what home feels like." And for once, Gabriel didn't need to say anything. He simply lifted his hand, signed, "I love you," and she smiled, replying in the same silent, beautiful way. Because sometimes love doesn't need words at all. In the end, it wasn't grand gestures or perfect timing that healed them. It was kindness, quiet, patient, and steady, spoken in a language the heart always understands.